living in an era of accelerating demand. Stalinist communism is in ruins in Europe.
Capitalism is involved in debt and on the brink of a depression.
The third world countries ravage their people and land in a bid to pay off their national debt and raise themselves from poverty.
The devotion of vast tracts of fertile land to meat production appears both unnecessary and undesirable. It takes 200 litres of water to produce a kilo of wheat, but 20,000 litres to produce a kilo of beef.
% of water pollution results from organic wastes attributed to livestock.
The organic residues of pesticides are overwhelmingly caused by meat production, 55% in the United States, and dairy operations, 23%. Only 11% of combined pesticide residues come from growing vegetables, grains, and fruits. If all humans were meat eaters, global petroleum reserves would disappear by the year 2003. If they were vegetarians, by 2250.
If only 10% of Americans stopped eating meat, all imports would no longer be necessary for the US.
An acre of land can produce 10,000 kilos of potatoes, but only 80 kilos of beef. Approximately 20 vegetarians can feed on the amount of land it takes to feed one meat eater.
260 million acres of U.S. forest have been cleared to create cropping land for livestock, and 1 acre of trees are spared per year for every person who switches to a vegetarian diet.
Australia has more trees than Malaysia, the Philippines, Cambodia, Vietnam, Laos, Thailand and both Koreas combined, and only slightly fewer than the whole of Europe.
High-cast native Australian timber fetches up to $2,000 a cubic metre and even $2,000 for a veneer quality log of some species. According to Forestry conservator Tom Rome,
some of the 20,000 flowering species in tropical rainforests can be very successful in plantations. There is a vast area of tropical world that needs to have its forest cover re-established, an opportunity for Australia to participate in screening species for us elsewhere.
Scientist Jeff Tracy, over 4 years, led a simple but important experiment, planting 1,500 trees on 3 hectares of sloping gully cleared of rainforest long ago.
Quicker growing gums and wattles would pioneer a protective mantle for the more sensitive rainforest trees underneath. Later the rainforest trees would dominate.
You got your way with the Franklin Dam. Now there's 13% of Tasmania in national parks.
Mr. Tony Armstrong, forestry workers leader, told demonstrators at Farmhouse Creek. According to the Wilderness Society, there are some 700,000 hectares of derelict farmland in Tasmania, more than half of which could sustain reforestation. Keith Orme, Chief of Research of Forest Resources, calculates that
the most basic plantation techniques used now could shrink the area cut for Tasmania's annual pulpwood harvest from 2.6 million hectares of forest to 1/8 of that area of plantation. About 60,000 cubic metres of sawlogs each year come from southern forests. In plantations, this volume could be grown on 8,000 hectares, a fraction of the estate forest.
Brazil is getting growth rates of 70 cubic metres with Tasmanian blue gums and harvesting every 7 years. Settler Ethel Hassel, who lived in the northeast of the Stirling Ranges in Western Australia, tells of how Aborigines obtained a thick, purplish syrup by stripping and scraping the bark of yaped trees.
they often eat this syrup like honey and said it was very nourishing. I have frequently eaten it and it tastes like a mixture of treacle and honey.
Stephen Harris of the Tasmanian Department of Parks, Wildlife and Heritage has proposed the harvest of this sap as flavouring essence or maple syrup substitute.
A preliminary assessment indicated a potential annual production of at least 15 litres from one tree. If 1,000 yielding trees could produce 15,000 litres, then the indicated value would be around $300,000, using the retail price of maple syrup as a guide.
The syrup may provide a distinct alternative to maple syrup, the production of which is declining drastically in the Northern Hemisphere due to the death of trees from the effects of acid rain.
Under the direction of Andrew Knorr, a revolutionary method of milling has been developed. The saw traverses the length of the log and also cuts on the return pass, each time cutting radially from sapwood to hardwood.
The resultant triangular profiled lengths have much of the tension relieved, particularly in young timber, whereas quarter-sawn timber tends to retain the tensions of growth.
Radial cutting gives up to 50% greater timber recovery from a log and up to 100% greater product recovery in certain lines, for example weatherboards. Larger section timbers are obtained by lamination methods. With simple arrangements, any stored tensions are balanced in the resultant lamination. The commercial attraction to the radial sawing technique is that the small diameter young logs can provide quality timbers. Previously, a 15-year-old eucalypt would only be considered for pulp, demanding $100 per tonne, that is only $30 for the tree. But now a 15-year-old tree with a 12 to 14-inch diameter may yield $150 worth of quality timber produce.
Our forests, due to logging practices, have a high percentage of young trees suitable for radial milling, making them more valuable than pulping such timber. Plantation and agroforestry enterprises would allow a higher financial yield in less than half the 50 years or so traditionally estimated for millable quality timber.
A large amount of rainforest destruction in South America is due to clearing land to create pasture for beef production for the U.S. market. Tropical soils are thin, and the new grazing lands are depleted, forcing a migration deeper into virgin stands of forest. After suffering deforestation, floods and malnutrition, in order to grow filet mignon, the people of Costa Rica eat less meat than the average North American house cat.
In the Rondônia region of Brazil, the World Bank donated $400 million for an interstate highway in the early 80s, designed to provide access through the jungle to the rich cities of Rio de Janeiro and Brasilia.
Landless peasants allowed to cultivate 40-hectare strips tore out stretches of rainforest to plant melons and corn. Within 2 years, the soil was dead. In tropical climates, most nutrients are stored in vegetation, not in the soil. Consequently, farmers moved on, destroying in the process 11% of Rondônia's forest region.
When growers abandon ancient varieties to plant single variety monocultures, the potential for widespread disaster is greatly increased. At least one strain of an endangered species of wild rice, known to scientists as Oryza novara, contains an ancient gene that resists grassy stunt virus, a rice pathogen that, sweeping through Asia, would be capable of destroying the mainstay of 3 billion people.
Biotechnologists cannot invent the genes transfer between related plants. They must come from wild sources. The Oryza novara is disappearing faster than it can be saved. The rice recovered from Sri Lanka is still available because it happens to grow in a wildlife reserve.
Old varieties are disappearing as farmers use modern varieties to increase productivity, to meet the tastes of consumers and to provide maximum protein. By relying on few crop strains instead of many, farmers open themselves to disaster.
Ireland's infamous potato famine of 1845 started with a fungus accidentally introduced from Mexico. The scourge spread through millions of genetically similar potatoes, leaving the Irish without their major food source, and nearly 500,000 people starved to death.
A few decades later, a fungus wiped out the homogeneous coffee plantations of Ceylon, transforming that island into one of the world's major tea producers.
As recently as 1984, a bacterial disease struck Florida, forcing 135 nurseries to destroy 18 million citrus trees and seedlings.
Single species plantations are a recipe for disaster. A complex system has a much better chance of surviving disease or insect attack.
Only 2% of the world's plants have been scientifically analysed. In the words of Ahmed Kostemans, the greatest living botanist,
Scientists blame the loggers. Loggers blame the settlers. Settlers blame the government. All of them are full of contradictions. Too many people want too much.
The disappearance of food crops is part of a larger problem. The genetic diversity of the entire plant community is eroding, and nowhere is the rate of destruction greater than in parts of Southeast Asia.
Protected areas. They exist only on paper in poor countries. Once I found a new tree species in a protected area in western Java. Only one of its kind. And loggers cut it down in a week.
This aged botanist knows the value of tropical rainforests. They saved his life when he was a prisoner of the Japanese. Kostemans, conscripted to help build the bridge over the River Kwai, survived on forest plants, using them for food and medicine. Of the 20,000 other prisoners, 18,000 died. A grateful Kostemans has dedicated his life to the study and preservation of natural flora.